Welcome back to another Ret Paladin video. Verabin here. Today we are going to talk about Ashran, and this is one of the coolest epic battlegrounds that is available. And because honor is such a huge resource that you want to be farming up in Shadowlands, I think it's important for us to look at some of the battlegrounds that we excel at the most and where we can kind of gain some more benefit there and ensure that our team succeeds. So I believe that Ret is extremely powerful in epic battlegrounds, especially Ashran. I've run this one a few times in Shadowlands and it is really fun, and I think Ret brings a ton to the table here. So we're going to talk about a lot of different things and how to be successful in these battlegrounds, and one of them is going to be just in general tactics, and we're also going to talk about talents and what kind of talents, kind of things you want to do, including PvP talents, and then obviously we're going to talk about just kind of gameplay kind of stuff. So there's two overarching kind of pieces to battleground, especially epic battleground stuff here, and that's sort of like overarching sort of strategical tactics, and then there's also kind of like ability-wise, class-specific kind of tactics. So we're going to talk about all of that stuff in this video. So stick around, let's take a look. Before we get started in the video, please be sure to hash that like button and subscribe for more Ret Paladin content. I'm going to be doing content every 2 or 3 days in Shadowlands, so you don't want to miss a thing. Alright, so as you can tell from the footage, Ashran is a crazy battleground, and what is so cool about this one is that it has these bottlenecks that are just kind of natural bottlenecks at a few different places. There's this middle one that's right in the middle of the map where you're going to kind of be pushing towards your enemy's base, and then there's a bridge at your base and a bridge at the enemy's base. So there's these natural bottlenecks that occur, and it's really good for just doing AoE damage. And so that is why I'm using a more AoE focused build. I'm using Empyrean Power, and I'm using, I believe I'm using Ringing Clarity for my Potency Conduit, and that will give me a little bit of burst damage when I need it. And the Empyrean Power Divine Purpose kind of build allows me to do more AoE damage. I'm actually using Tempest of the Lightbringer as a legendary. It's the only legendary that I have, so I'd probably be using it anyway, right? But just for the stats at this point. But I think it's actually a decent legendary in epic battlegrounds as well, because it gives you a little bit more range. And you can see I'm not using my melee abilities very often. I'm using Crusader Strike, I'm using Judgment, I'm using Hammer of Wrath. So you don't end up using a whole heck of a lot of melee abilities, so having more ranged in your arsenal is going to be really important. So for PvP talents, obviously Reckoning is going to be your bread and butter, and especially in epic battlegrounds, it's going to stack up so quickly. You can see how many times I'm going to have wings up, and you keep an eye out on the Reckoning tracker. It procs constantly, so I end up having to using that a lot, and there's times where it'll proc and I'm starting to get another one, and I'll make sure that I can go and melee someone, because there's going to be these fat melees that show up, like 5k, 7k melee swings, where you could do a ton of damage with that. And then there's obviously a side benefit of using your being able to get wings up and being able to throw those hammers. So it's a really strong ability. Another one that's really good is Vindication, and I don't really use that one because I find that Unbound Freedom is really important, and I want to use Lawbringer and Unbound Freedom. So sometimes I'll choose between Vindication or Reckoning, but both are really strong, and you can definitely use both. If you feel comfortable with the healers that you have, you can definitely use Vindication and Reckoning, so you have two of those kind of stacking ones, and those work best in larger battleground scenarios where people are constantly getting CC'd and constantly getting crit, and you're just going to get these things fed to you constantly and have all of this kind of stacking, kind of passive damage, and that allows you to not have to go in so close. You can just kind of throw hammers and throw judgments and throw heals and stuff like that. So as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the most important things to do in epic battlegrounds like this is making sure that you understand kind of what's going on in the battlefield and you kind of don't overextend. Overextending is the quickest way to die. You can see there's just this wall of enemies in these clips, and I'm kind of staying at the edge of them and kind of trying to push the line forward the right direction, but you can't always. And what's the funny thing about epic battlegrounds is it almost feels like a dungeon or something, because there's tanks and there's healers, and it's just kind of this big group, and there's almost like these kind of pulls that happen where there's these engagements that happen for a few minutes, and then you'll have to push forward to the next pack. And it kind of really feels like that. And so it's interesting. You're going to play these a lot differently than you're going to play even just regular battlegrounds, like the smaller battlegrounds like Warsong Gulch, where you're going to do a lot more 1v1 or 1v2. And this one is more like 10v10, 20v20 all the time. It's a lot of fun. And you can see that I do my best to kind of push forward, but I also will pay very close attention to kind of how the team is doing, how we're pushing forward, how my health is doing, what kind of cooldowns I have available. You know, if I have Shield of Vengeance and Bubble available, I will push a lot more aggressively than if I don't have those things available. And once I use Freedom, I usually stay back and heal or cleanse a little bit, and I wait for Freedom to come up, especially if it looks kind of dangerous to move forward, because you don't necessarily want to just keep pushing, because you can definitely push too far. And in the clip right now, you can see we made it through one wave and we're pushing forward to the next wave, but this is kind of a situation where you can definitely you can push forward too fast and you can get overwhelmed, because keep in mind their graveyard is a lot closer than our graveyard, so if we lose 5 people, then it's a lot harder for us to replenish those. So keep that in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you're using LVUI on your unit frames, you can see where it's popping out where healers and tanks are. So usually focus on healers and tanks, because tanks will kind of keep the line forward, and healers will obviously keep everybody alive. So whenever a healer pushes forward too fast, I'll definitely try to punish them and kind of push forward and take care of those guys. Another thing you've probably seen me doing is doing a lot of AoE damage, and because I have the Tempest of the Lightbringer Legendary, it's really easy for me to just kind of spam Divine Storms and kind of keep damage spreading around. It depends on how many people are within range, because, you know, Templar's Verdict is melee range and Divine Storm is melee range, so there's not a whole lot I can do as far as spending Holy Power at within melee range, or if they're outside of melee range, I mean. So I will kind of push forward and throw Divine Storms and try to focus on sort of bursting down people with Wake of Ashes or with Execution Sentence or with Ringing Clarity or whatever, and then kind of do a tactical retreat, which is what you're going to see me do here in just a second. Whenever I get below like 50-60% health, I usually start to kind of go back and kind of throw hammers and judgments and stuff, but I will kind of wait for my cooldowns to come back before I push forward again, because if you push forward and don't have Freedom and Bubble and your Shield of Vengeance, then you're probably going to die. All right, so you can see here that I'm pushing forward to try to kill one of these healers, and I think I'm actually going to make a pretty big mistake here, because this is a really big choke point coming up at this bridge. So I get pretty excited to kill this healer, and then I'm like, okay, cool, we're going to start pushing this bridge, and then I get stunned. And stuns are really scary. You can see I don't have my human racial available. I don't have anything available, so I sort of have to back off a little bit, and I don't realize just how few of my allies are with me. So when you look at the group, it kind of looks like, hey, I should be safe. There's a lot of people here, but then I get rooted, and I don't have Freedom, and I just die. So you die so fast. So in this particular Ashran, I was actually able to do pretty good damage, even without being in melee range. So you can see you can still do really good damage and still keep your heals up. All right, so we're going to skip ahead to another clip where it's another big clash between big groups of people. And you can see it's interesting that the tanks really do push forward, and then they can survive quite a bit. So you have to kind of push them and kind of get through the tanks before you can actually do much. I end up doing a lot of off healing in these kind of scenarios and using my cooldowns and trying to cleanse other people. One of the things that I could definitely do better is to keep an eye on my teammates. And there's times where, I'm at 75% HP and I'm going to Word of Glory myself, and I could probably Word of Glory someone else who's at 50% HP, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind, is keeping your people alive, especially healers, and keeping an eye on them. Throwing a bop here or there, throwing a sack here or there is definitely going to make a big difference. So that's going to be definitely a kind of an important clip, is making sure you're using those utility spells and stuff like that, and making sure that you're retreating and using your cooldowns when you need to. You can see there that I almost died and I was able to bubble, and it's not typical that someone's going to remove your bubble in a big group play like this because there's so much going on that it's just not that typical. So you can usually just safely use your bubble and heal through it and kind of get back in there. But keep in mind, once you use your bubble, that's kind of your big get out of jail free card. So once you've used that bubble, you're going to have to play a little bit cautiously from there on out. And unfortunately for Ret Paladins, our first tier of talents doesn't really give you a whole lot that's going to be beneficial, because you can see I'm using the execution sentence here, and it does help me get this kill. But in a lot of cases, you're going to have to retreat, you're going to have to run away and stuff, and you don't end up actually being able to get a good enough execution sentence there. So you can see in this scenario, I overextended a little bit to kill that healer, so I had to back off a little bit. And at this point, all of my cooldowns are down. I do have Blessing of Protection that I could use, but normally I save that for healer. I don't really want to use that on myself. So I'm going to back off a little bit. And I also noticed that our group is really, really small. There's a big NPC coming through here. So in Ashran specifically, the NPCs can actually do a ton of damage. So you have to be careful with them. I mean, they're way more dangerous than the players. You can see this guy, Lord Mez, is following me, and he is taking me to town. So I'm going to back off. We also actually have very few people, less than 10 people here, so we're going to back off. And this is the thing about pushing forward, is that when you start to lose people, you don't have your graveyard is so far away that you can't actually push forward you have to be careful how far you push forward, because in this scenario we have almost no backup, so I end up having to run. And I have freedom down, I have shield down, bubble down, so I don't have a whole lot up at this point. But one of the things here to keep in mind is that you can definitely use Crusader Strike on and do those other melee abilities on pets, and that's something that you can keep an eye on. A lot of times the unit frames don't actually show you like where the pets are, so that's something that I could do a little better there, kind of keeping an eye on that. So in this other clip, this is after I died, we push forward again, and this is more of them actually pushing forward towards us. So the game kind of pushed the other direction, and that's kind of how this one can play out. And this one plays a lot differently than the other epic battlegrounds. Like AV is normally just a big rush to the end boss, and who can back cap a little bit better and stuff like that, and who can kill the boss fastest and stuff. But Ashran's a lot different. This one is a totally different beast, and you can see here that I actually got into a situation where I couldn't see what was going on. I could see the bars and stuff, but I couldn't actually see the gameplay, so that was kind of sketchy. I was zoomed way far out, so I ended up almost getting in trouble there. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is there's this awareness, there's this weird sort of like raid awareness kind of thing, and that can happen in these bigger battlegrounds. Alright, so to recap this video, we are looking at epic battlegrounds, and I believe Ret Paladin is the king of epic battlegrounds. We can do so much damage in group play like this, and we have so many decent cooldowns that we can kind of rotate around and survive. We have the ability to get the heck out of there when we need to. We can cleanse, we can do all kinds of really cool stuff. But it requires us to have the right kind of strategic tactics on the battlefield, but also within our own play style. So focus on those ranged attacks and making sure you keep those off cooldown. Keep yourself alive. If you get below 60, 50% health, definitely get out of there. Wait for some cooldowns, back up, and focus on killing those healers, keeping your holy power up so you can always pop those words of glory. Some of the really important talents that are going to help you out a lot here are things like Empyrean Power and Divine Purpose, where you can consistently dump AoE damage. And I believe that the Tempest of the Lightbringer legendary is actually really, really good for this particular strategy in this kind of gameplay. So it's probably not going to be the best PvP legendary, but in an epic battleground situation where you're having these large scale battles, I think it's actually a pretty good option, and it's really good for Mythic Plus as well. So you're going to get some, a lot of bang for your buck for that one. As far as PvP talents go, Reckoning is one that you can never drop. You're always going to use Reckoning. It's such an amazing talent for staying ranged and keeping those heals up, keeping those the damage going with those bigger auto attacks, and I believe Lawbringer is pretty good. You could probably dump Lawbringer for not for Reckoning, sorry, for Vindication, and that's going to be another really good stacking one that's good for bigger groups. Unbound Freedom is going to be really important for allowing you to get out of tough places. So that is all for the video. If you guys enjoy this kind of video, please be sure to hash that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next one.